Good evening, everyone. Tonight, I chose to take a look at uh, how climate change has an impact on the forests of Pennsylvania and what we should expect over the next century or so as climate change impacts our forests and our forest products and the tree and plant life that grows there. Having grown up in Pennsylvania, I learned at a young age that Pennsylvania means Penn's Woods. So the value of the ecosystem and the forest ecosystem to uh, to the state of Pennsylvania has been well known since its beginnings. As a matter of fact, when the first settlers came to Pennsylvania, about 90% of the state was covered with forest. And the state itself is sort of in the heart of the temperate deciduous forest biome. So it shouldn't surprise us that basically trees have always been an important part of the state. Now, one of the things that surprised me is that even in the face of development, about 58% of the state still remains forested today. Now, there's a couple of reasons that's surprising. The first thing is that a significant amount of the state is developed, particularly where I live, right outside of the city of Philadelphia, and then in the western part of the state where you find the city of Pittsburgh. But also in the 19th century, a significant amount of the state was completely logged as the wood was being used for the iron industry, and then later on the development of some uh, other industries for fuel. And so many of our trees and our native trees were actually cut down and the forests replanted over time. And so although our forests are mature, they are not original to the state. But even that being said, the forest has a huge contribution on the economy of Pennsylvania. First off, uh, our state gets about $5.5 billion of revenue from the lumber and forest industry, and about 90,000 Pennsylvanians work in the forest industry. So this represents a significant piece of our manufacturing workload. Also, Pennsylvania is the largest producer of hardwoods in the country, and they account for 10% of the total hardwood output in the U.S. So our issues with our forest are not just limited here to Pennsylvania, but also are connected to other states as well as they purchase the wood that's produced here. I've also given two other comments regarding the economy and the connection to trees, basically saying that some other businesses are involved with the production of wood, and that every dollar paid to timber owners for trees generates to manufacturing $17 worth of economic growth. So the wood itself is an important raw material for work that is done here in the state. Now, as we take a look at the current forest distribution, one of the things that we see is that in the southern part of the state, we see trees like oak and hickory, which are typically found in southern locations, uh, being some of the predominant forest types that we see in the state. But the dominant plants that we see, particularly in the north, are maples, beeches, and birches. And this is sort of what we're going to consider the traditional forest of Pennsylvania. Now, why this is important is one of the big indicators that we can see in the state of climate change is what has happened to the distribution of trees and what's expected to happen distribution wise. In my next slide will take a look at that. In Pennsylvania, one of the things that we see is, and apologize my click to add text, but I'm working from a split screen and I'm not able to show my full slides. But one of the things we see is the projections of two different models of global climate change. On the left, we see the average of three global climate change models with a high impact. And on the right, we see the average of three global climate change models with a low impact. And each one of them shows a very distinct change of the distribution of plant species within the Pennsylvania forest. Under the high model, we see a very drastic change. As a matter of fact, what we see is that the traditional maple, beech, and birch forests are completely eliminated. We actually see no signs of them. As a matter of fact, the entire state is dominated uh, with oak and hickory, with the exception of some areas that there's no data that's been established for those areas. So, under the most extreme circumstances, we will see that the traditional Pennsylvania forest has disappeared. You actually have to go all the way into upstate New York to find those maple, beech, and birch trees, which is a huge change to their range. But on the low model, we also see a significant change, and we see a huge uh, addition of oak and hickory forested areas, and only a small area in the northern part of the state that is reserved for maple, beech, and birch. Now, this would be a better case scenario, but still, huge implications for the state in terms of the plant and tree species that we see. Now, this shouldn't surprise us when we consider that in 2012, the USDA released a new plant hardiness zone map, and we see the same trend in the hardiness zones. Especially taking a look at Zone 6, which is the light green color, we see that in the 1990 version of the map, that light green color stretches from basically here in the east from St. Louis all the way up through my region in southeastern Pennsylvania and then continuing on through New Jersey. You see that that tends to be the most dominant in the southern part of the state, and then the northern part of the state would fall in Zone 5. In the 2012 change to the hardiness zones, we see that that Zone 6 almost entirely encompasses the entire state. Just the northwestern part of the state now falls in Zone 5. And we actually see in my area, just outside of Philadelphia, that Zone 7 has crept in. So it shouldn't surprise us that one of the responses we see in plant species is a trending to more southern style plants coming into the north. Now, the question is, why is this happening and what's going on that causes this shift in plants and in tree life in the Pennsylvania forest? Well, what happens is as temperatures increase, there is an impact on the existing forest species. And those impacts are because of drought, thanks to a greater evaporation and a change in the water levels of the soil. Fire, also due to additional drying conditions. The presence of insects and disease that become more prevalent as the plants become stressed because of a changing temperature and changing climate conditions, and also some secondary changes that we see to the species. Basically, that as those plants become stressed, their growth rates slow down, and they also experience reduced reproductive success. So, one of the things that we notice is that the existing plants find themselves in much greater danger for higher mortality. And the response to that then is that plants that would be better adapted and better suited for those environments tend to begin to take over. And that's that trend that we are seeing within the forest. Now, I did find this slide, and I like this. I like this picture because I think it provides a pretty good summary of what goes on in the face of climate change to the forest. And as we start on the left-hand side, we see basically that drought intolerant species regenerate poorly. So as we experience drought and a change in climate, those plants begin to really struggle in terms of growth and regeneration. Drought tolerant species start to come in and move into the area, and we start to see those southern plants moving up as we do. We notice that seedlings don't survive as well, so new plants and ones that were existing don't have the same reproductive results. We see the introduction of pests and fire, as I mentioned, which adds to mortality. And then we see that as plants come in and are planted, uh, very often new drought tolerant ones or ones that are more temperature tolerant come in, and they begin to become the more dominant plants in a given area. So the question becomes, what do we do about it? And what should we be doing in Pennsylvania to maintain our forests? And research suggests that the true key to mitigation in the light of climate change is to maintain the forest the best ways that we can. Basically, to limit deforestation, to practice good management techniques when it comes to handling the forests. One of the key issues in Pennsylvania is that most of our forests are actually owned by private farm owners and private landowners. And so encouraging those private landowners to actually manage their forests in a responsible way is sort of key to helping maintain the forest area. The other thing to do is to consider planting new forests. However, some research suggests that planting tree plantations doesn't have the same effect of carbon sequestration that we might expect if we just sort of allowed the forest to grow on its own. And so it looks like that it's far better just to mitigate climate change by trying to maintain the forest areas rather than necessarily jumping in and replanting as a solution. But uh, Pennsylvania does have a significant amount of marginal lands, lands that were once used for agriculture or for once used for farming, that were abandoned, or for mining, that are no longer used in the mining industry, that would be ripe for planting and would increase photosynthesis. And by taking that into account, planting trees would be a benefit to the overall condition of Pennsylvania's forests. Now, in maintaining the forest, there are some things that we see that are benefits beyond just uh, the direct result of saying it's going to make the climate better. One of the things we can consider is that converting non-forest land to forest increases the diversity of plant and animal life, particularly in areas that are in those marginal sections. Also, avoiding deforestation provides other co-benefits like protecting biodiversity, water and soil resources, and the maintenance of non-timber forest products and services. There are many benefits that people get from the existence of the forest that stretch all the way through to recreation. Also, carbon dioxide sequestration is maintained as long as the forest is functioning. And also, the more that we manage the forest resources, the more the forest is capable of performing greater sequestration. The other thing that I noticed is that it's actually very reasonable to replant a forest. Reforestation only costs about $160 an acre, which can be supplemented even with additional tax benefits. That $160 an acre also becomes an investment in the future, as the landowners who have planted those trees can eventually sell the wood and forestry products that come as a result of it. And so it's one of those areas where there is an economic benefit to taking the time to maintaining the forest or of adding additional forest area. But in looking at this is not an issue that's limited to Pennsylvania. Any areas that have been forested are sort of ripe for practicing good mitigation techniques like protecting the forest or for reforestation. Article 2 of the Kyoto Protocol requires efforts to promote sustainable development and the reduction of greenhouse gases. And one of the ways to do that is to protect the forest. We've also seen that there have been successful efforts at replenishment of the forest in countries like South Korea, Kenya, and Turkey. As a matter of fact, South Korea has been working on the concept of reforestation for a significant amount of time. I'm going to say for at least the last 50 years in response to some early uh, bad management techniques of their forests. But the good news is that currently forest numbers are actually on the rise in most industrialized countries. A lot of nations have seen the benefits of reforestation and are actually looking to maintain their forests and allow them to grow, which in the long term I think is good news for all of us. Now, in the long term, the Pennsylvania Impact Study, which I actually referenced earlier in my research, had an update that was just released in 2013 to look at some of its original conclusions. And what they found is that uh, their conclusions they drew in 2009 in their original report still remain the same. Here in Pennsylvania's forests, we see that tree species and their suitable habitats are shifting northward. The warming climate does cause increased mortality rates within species, and so we will see some declining populations of existing species, and some other ones that I'll let you take a look at here on the slide. Just to wrap up, I will say that it looks like that maintaining our forests is going to be the key to maintaining uh, our forestry in Pennsylvania. Thank you.